Welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Alexandra Hall. I'm your instructor for this course in Community and Public Health. And this first unit, before we get into the textbook, we're actually going to start with some framing about public health in general, introducing some of the main concepts and themes we're going to be talking about over the course of this course, and just helping you get your mind in the right space. So let's get started. If you Google health to find a definition or look it up in a dictionary, the chances are that you're going to find a definition that looks like this, being the state of being free from illness or injury, which is a very fine definition, but if you think about it, it's a negative. It's the absence of something, right? So it's not being sick, not being hurt, which is good, but perhaps not necessarily what we're striving for. This is a negative. This is an absence of something. So if you look a little bit farther, you might find some different definitions, one of which I'm going to share with you. This is the definition from the World Health Organization, which is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. So this is a more comprehensive description. This is a positive description, something we're striving for, of wellness, the ability to be thriving. So I think this is a much more dynamic and exciting definition of health and what we would really want to see for the people in our communities. Historically, when we talk about health, we've usually talked about two different components of health, physical health and mental health. So your physical health, how well is your body working for you? How well is your heart pumping? How well is your brain firing off synapses? How well are your intestines absorbing nutrients and digesting for you? How well are your joints and muscles moving? So basically, just how well is this meat skeleton that you're packaged in with squishy bits on the inside, how well is it functioning? So that's your physical health. And then your mental health, we're usually talking mostly about your emotional health when we talk about mental health, but that can include your cognitive health and functioning as well. So those have been kind of the two typical realms that we consider when we're talking about health and wellness. And we know that there are certain things that are really important for your physical health. So exercise and moving your body, we are designed to actually be in motion much of the time, is really important. Getting enough sleep is super duper important. Eating well, of course, and getting nutritious foods and enough foods and not too many. And then exercise again. I'm not really sure what that purple circle is for. And then we have the heart. So with a little EKG tracing, access to medical care. So if you're sick or ill or develop a disease, access to appropriate care and management to help you function as well as possible. But we need to think about mental health as well. And although, interestingly, many of those factors that we just talked about in terms of eating right and getting exercise have a very profound effect on your mental health as well, there are other things that are also going to contribute. So we think about physical health, we think about mental health, but people who have worked in the wellness space and really study what allows people to thrive have proposed different models and different ways of looking at wellness. So I'm going to show you one of those now. And so this is the dimensions of wellness. This is from UC Davis, so University of California at Davis. They're from their health center. And we can see, let's see if I can get my little pen. Oh, let's do laser pointer. Okay. All right. So we can see here that they've got physical health. So we just kind of talked about that. They also have emotional health. So they have those two that we talked about already. But you can see they've added in a whole bunch of other ones. So let's talk about those a little bit. So spiritual health here can refer to participation in some type of organized religion, or it can just refer to some belief in something that is bigger than oneself, or a sense of meaning in the world. fulfilled, right? So a sense that there's a purpose in your life, there's a purpose to our existence. And what's very interesting is that we've found really compelling data that people who have a robust spiritual life or spiritual wellness do better physically and mentally than people who don't. And it may or may not, again, be part of an organized religion, but having some sort of connection to something deeper is important for human health. So that's spiritual health. We'll come down the wheel here to social. So we are social creatures. Actually, human beings do not do well in isolation. Like many other mammals and other species, we do best when we are part of a group. And having loving, caring, kind, respectful relationships with other people is actually really central to our thriving. So your social health is really important. I'm going to move over here to intellectual health. So this is kind of interesting, and you're like, well, it's from a university, so maybe they'd throw it on there. But intellectual health refers to the fact that not only are we social creatures, but we are thinking creatures. And so for most of us, in order to be happy and healthy and thrive, we need to be working on things and puzzling things out and satisfying our curiosity. We like to have mental challenges. We like to do problem solving and feel like we're, out there doing things in the world. So something to keep our brains active is also important for thriving for human beings. Next, I'm going to move to environmental. I'm sorry, I don't know how to make the camera thing smaller. I tried, it was a disaster. So I apologize that I'm like in the way of the slide here, but this is environmental health. And so I want to challenge you that environmental health can refer to a lot of different things. So it's not just, okay, so here I am in Menominee, Wisconsin. The air is pretty clean here. We have good water to drink. It's really cold right now, and so there are things that we need to do to protect our health because of the weather. We can also think about larger scale environment, like what's happening with climate change and what's happening with microplastics and endocrine disruptors and PFAS polluting well water, right? So all of those things. And then we can also think about environmental health in terms of our close and direct environment. So take a look at the space around you. Is it warm? Is it comfortable? Is it inviting? Is it lovely? Or is cluttered? Is it messy? Is it noisy? So think about your direct environment that you have control over as well. So environmental can refer to everything from that kind of individual level to the grand scale of our entire planet. So I've left occupational and financial for last. They are important in some ways. So occupational health here has a close tie to intellectual health, right? And feeling that you're active, you're thinking, you're doing things with your brain often, depending on the job. But there are some other jobs that aren't intellectually stimulating, and that can be okay because you can get your intellectual stimulation elsewhere, right? Perhaps your job isn't intellectually stimulating, but you really like the people you work with. So it's contributing to your social wellness and you really have a good group. Or for most of us, occupational health also refers to this other one here at the bottom, which is financial health. Now, this one I take a little bit of issue with because depending on what type of society you are in, emotional health may or may not have, financial health may or may not have anything to actually do with your overall wellness. In our culture and in our society, we have set it up so that in order to meet your basic needs for food and shelter and clothing and participation in a social life, you need money. And so in our society, financial health is a really important component of wellness. In other societies that do not function in the same way in relationship to money and in which things are provided for all, financial wellness is not really a part of the picture, because it doesn't matter how much money you have, you still have all of the other things. So just something interesting to think about. All right. Oh no. Here we go. I'm having technical difficulties. All right, there we go. Okay. PowerPoint has changed how it does recordings. I apologize. It's going to be a rocky road in the beginning here. Okay, so this is just another kind of dimensions of wellness map. I like some of the explanations that are here, but again, you can see we have emotional, intellectual, physical, social, environmental, financial, and spiritual. This particular one, they left off occupational, because as long as you're meeting these other things, right, you may get that through a job, or you may get that from other means. So I kind of like this one a little bit better, but the other one was a little prettier. This is just one more kind of map. They make them really nice and pretty. This one does include occupational wellness, but so it's something interesting to think about. And your assignment, your activity for this chunk of this unit is to actually take an inventory of your own wellness and then report back on it to me. All right, so those are different models of wellness. So now we're going to talk about determinants of health. So if we break this down, like, what are the things that determine your health, right? What are the factors that influence your health, both physical and mental, and impact these other aspects of wellness in addition? The list is relatively short when you kind of look at it big picture. So your behaviors, right? Do you exercise? Do you consume alcohol or other drugs? Do you get together with friends regularly? Are you part of a faith community, right? So your behaviors, these are choices that you make. Then there's your genetics or your biology, just how your body is. And for some of us, that can be really huge if you're born with a genetic disease, or you're born with congenital heart disease. That can have a very powerful influence on your overall health and wellness. For people who do not have a significant inherited or congenital condition, right, maybe Aunt Gertrude died of a heart attack when she was 55. How much does that really impact your individual risk? Well, it varies a lot. Access to medical care is going to be important, right? So not only is there an emergency room and hospital and cardiologist who can take care of you if you're having a heart attack, but is there somebody who can take care of you when you fall and break your leg? Can you get vaccines to help prevent severe illnesses? All of the things that go into medical care. Can you access it, and is it good quality? And then social and societal characteristics, which a lot of people are kind of surprised to see this one on the list. And but this refers to, again, how your society and your place within it is structured, and therefore how well able you are to kind of meet all of those different criteria on those models of wellness that we were seeing. So generally, when we ask people which factors they think are the most important for influencing health in our society in general, people usually tend to think that the first three are the most powerful. But actually, when we look at which factors are most powerful, it is absolutely the social and societal characteristics. So the total ecology of where you live. So genes and biology are actually tiny for the vast majority of people. Now, again, there are exceptions. If you're born with certain genetic mutations or certain conditions, it can have a very influence on that individual's health. But this is when we're talking about the population level. And that's one of the things we're going to be talking about in this course, is when we're doing public health, we're talking about the overall health of the population as a whole, rather than the individuals within it. So when we look at the population as a whole, genes and biology have a tiny impact on the overall health of a population. Health behaviors have a significant impact, so it makes up not quite a quarter of the influence. So are people smoking, drinking, exercising? What are they eating? And I always find this really interesting because we tend to focus on this a lot in our society. We have a very individualistic society when you look at kind of different ways that cultures are structured. And so we always feel like, well, I'm responsible for my own health, and the choices that I make are going to be what determine how I do. And although they have an impact, right, although they have a measurable impact, that impact is relatively small in comparison to some other things, as you can see. Certainly, access to medical care, as I mentioned earlier, is also important. If somebody can do a stent or a bypass operation when you're having a heart attack and then you survive, well, hey, that's a huge difference. Again, vaccines, routine pediatric care for children, access to good, appropriate medical care can make a huge difference on the health of a population overall. But the biggest contributor to the overall health of a population is the total ecology, those social and societal characteristics. And we're going to spend a little time talking about why that is the case. And this is kind of like when they talk about like goldfish swimming in their little tank, and they're like, how's the water? And they're like, I never really thought about it before, right? But this is something that is pervasive and has huge impacts on us, but we just don't tend to focus on it. It's just in the background. We don't look at it directly. So if you think about it, right, humans need food, water, air, shelter, and clothing. Okay, those are the things that we need. And then if we kind of look at wellness, well, we need connection, we need a sense of meaning and purpose, we need intellectual activity, right? We need those other things. But at the most basic level, these are the things we need. Your access to these things is determined by the society in which you live and your place in that society, right? We have all seen people who are unhoused, right? People who do not have the financial means to have stable shelter and housing, and do not have the financial means for appropriate food or clothing, right? Those people's health suffers significantly. Right? Those aren't individual choices necessarily that they're making, right? We have set things up in our society so that some people do not have these things, right? And there are many efforts to try to make sure that they do, and I get that it's complicated, and sometimes people are in those situations because of choices that they perhaps made, but it also is when we think about the quality of the food that you get, well, that's determined by a lot of things. So it's determined by your financial resources in our current society, which is a societal thing. It's also determined by do you live in a neighborhood where there really aren't any grocery stores? So we don't see that so much here in Menominee, but there are many cities in this nation, including our state, where it's miles to a grocery store. The only place you can get food in your little neighborhood is like a convenience store. So it's like fast food and packaged food and stuff that is not necessarily as healthy. When we think about food, we also need to think about, is the food that we're getting safe? Or is it contaminated with either bacteria or chemicals, pesticides, those types of things? And so that's a societal issue. Again, do we have rules and regulations in place to guarantee that our food will be safe for us? Same goes for water. Is your water safe to drink? And we don't tend to think about it very much. We just assume, well, of course it is, right? We're very fortunate in this country. There are many places in the world, and even in our own state, where the water is not safe to drink. So if you think about Flint, Michigan, for example, and the lead contamination in the water there, people who cannot drink the water coming out of their taps, that is a societal issue, right? That is the society, the greater structure, the greater ecology in which we live. When it comes to air, again, what systems do we have in place to prevent or ameliorate air pollution? What neighborhood do you live in? Do you live in a lovely rural place like here, where the air is nice and fresh the vast majority of the time? It might be too much pollen, but otherwise okay. Or do you live in a low-income neighborhood that's right underneath the flight path of a major airport, in which case you are inhaling tons of carcinogens on a regular basis? So you can see how we tend to just assume that our health is mostly our biology, our individual health behaviors, and our access to healthcare, because for most of us who are financially secure in our society, those are the things that are an issue. But all of those other all of these other things are so dependent on the social structure in which we exist and our place within it. So when we think about it from an international lens as well, right, these basic needs are not met in many communities. So I'm also going to add in, right, so we talked about the other dimensions of wellness, right? So you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was really interested in what is important for, he called it self-actualization, for the ability of people to be the best versions of themselves, the most evolved, most magnificent, to kind of reach their full potential. And the foundation of that is meeting your physiologic needs. So food, water, air, shelter, clothing. And without that, then nothing else is possible. You really can't go through these other stages. And then you see after physiologic needs, food, water, air, shelter, all those, it's safety. Right? So do you live in a neighborhood that is safe? Do you live in a place that is safe? And then after that, you have to have a sense of love and belonging. Right? And then after that, it's esteem, right? So confidence, being treated well and respected by others, having a sense of agency and able to do things. And then you can reach the pinnacle of your potential. So really interesting to think about. So all of this is to say that your ability to meet your basic human needs is largely dependent on your social and societal characteristics, that total ecology of where you live and where you fit in that society. And without access to food, water, shelter, the rest of it is moot. So we're going to be talking, especially when we look at different types of communities and different areas around the world, about all of these characteristics that impact people's ability to meet their basic needs. So lastly, what is public health, right? So we're finally coming around full circle. So public health is, so here's a definition, right? The science and art of preventing disease, right? So that's that kind of negative, trying to not get disease, prolonging life, and promoting health through organized community effort. So that's the thing, right? So that's working together as a community to do things at the population level. So here we go, the second part. The focus is on the community or population level rather than the individual. And this is a paradigm shift for a lot of people, right? We're talking about how to maximize the health of a large group of people through interventions that are going to impact everyone. So how do you do that? So there are three core functions of public health. And I'm going to take you through these. This is from the CDC. They have a free online course in public health, and I like some of their materials. So I'm sharing them with you. So the first function is assessment. So as it says, you need to collect, analyze, and make available information on healthy communities. So I like to think of this as what is going on? What's the situation? What are the challenges that we face? What are the things that are working well? What's going on, right? Assessment. What's going on? That's all I can come up with. Okay. And then you want to take that information and figure out what might work, what might be some useful interventions. So policy. Policy is, okay, here's some programs, here's some projects, here's some interventions we're going to do. So promote the use of a scientific knowledge base. So we want to make it this data and evidence-based. We don't want to just make stuff up. We want to make sure it makes sense in policy and decision making. So I like to think of this as the what can we do step, right? So what's going on? What are the issues? What can we do about them? And then step 3 is assurance. So making sure then that we're doing what we said we would do and that it's actually then meeting the goals or the objectives and having the impact that we hoped it would. So I like to think of assurance as, is it working? So what's going on? Assessment. What can we do? Policy. And is it working? Assurance. And then we can break these three things down even further. So again, this is from the CDC. So you can see, I'm going to use my little laser pointer again. I don't know if you can see it or not. I don't know. So here they have assessment. So monitoring health of the population. And so we actually have a lot of systems in place, many fewer than some other industrialized nations, but we do have a lot of systems in place to see what is going on, to collect data on the health of our population. And then also diagnose and investigate. So sometimes if there's something new cropping up and we're not sure what's going on, then we're going to send teams out to try to figure it out, right? So that could be an infectious disease outbreak. It could be a poisoning. It could be a contamination of a food source, right? Like E. coli in lettuce or something like that. Then policy, right? So we're going to inform, educate, and empower, right? So we want to make sure that people know what the issues are. We want to empower them to take action at their community level and an individual level. We're going to use community partnerships. So when we talk about public health, they're often partnering with other community groups to work together. And then develop policies. So taking all that information together, figuring out what's going to be the best way forward, and what's going to be the best way to tackle this issue. And then we go to assurance, right? So is it working? Are we doing it properly? So we're going to enforce any laws or policies that we have put in place. That's a part of this. We're going to link to and provide care. So we're going to actually get people the resources, medical care, whatever it is that they need. And part of that is assuring a competent workforce. And that's actually a struggle that we're having right now with shortages of healthcare providers, which have actually been a long time coming. We haven't done a good job with our pipeline, and then hugely exacerbated by the pandemic and people getting burned out and leaving healthcare. And then we're going to evaluate, right, and make sure that it's, we're going to look at our outcomes and are we having the intended effect. And then central to all of this is research. So again, we don't want to just make stuff up. We want to actually collect and analyze data to make sure that we understand what is truly happening. So these are the 10 essential public health services. So in summary, then, for your introduction to public health, health is both physical and mental, but we have many of these other facets of wellness that we've talked about, and you're going to do an activity assessing your own wellness as part of this unit. And that the major determinants of health, the big, powerful thing, is societal and social characteristics. So the total ecology of where you live and what your resources are and your access to resources. Then beyond that, your individual behaviors and access to medical care at the population level are the biggest impactors. Genetics and biology are very small because although they can have a huge influence on a small number of people, that's only a small number of people. So at the population level, it's a relatively small contributor. And then so public health is approaching the health of the entire population rather than an individual person. Okay, so that's different. And so we're going to say, what are the problems, right? What is the situation? What's going on? What can we do? That's developing policy, right? What might work? And then assurance. Is it working? So that's what we're going to be talking about over the course of this class. I'm excited to have you on board and reach out with any questions. Thanks so much.